Imagine standing on the Great Plains in the dead of winter. Not the kind of cold that makes you reach for a jacket. The kind that makes your lungs seize the moment you breathe in. The kind that turns exposed skin white in under 4 minutes. The wind doesn't blow here, it hunts. It comes screaming across hundreds of miles of open flatland, with nothing to stop it, carrying temperatures that regularly plunged to -30, -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Historians who studied survival records from this region found that an unprotected human being caught in these conditions had less than 2 hours before the body began shutting down. Less than 2 hours. On a land that stretched in every direction with no trees, no mountains, no refuge in sight. The snow doesn't fall gently here either. It moves sideways, filling the air like a wall of white, swallowing the horizon whole, erasing the line between earth and sky. To be caught outside in a Great Plains blizzard in the 1600s wasn't a weather inconvenience. It was a death sentence written in ice. And yet, and this is the part that should stop you cold, people didn't just survive here, they thrived here, for centuries. Somewhere beneath that roaring, frozen world, half buried in the earth itself, a small dome-shaped mound sat almost invisible against the white landscape. From the outside, you might walk right past it, but if you stopped, if you pressed your hand against its surface, you would feel something impossible. Warmth. Steady, quiet, undeniable warmth radiating through layers of soil and grass. And if you ducked through the low entryway and stepped inside, the world would transform completely. Families talking, children laughing, pots simmering over a low, glowing fire. The air rich with the smell of wood smoke and slow-cooked meat. Not survival, not endurance. Home. This was the Earth Lodge, built by the Mandan, the Hidatsa, and the Arikara, nations whose names most modern people have never heard, yet whose architectural genius rivals anything we celebrate today. They drew no blueprints, used no insulation foam, and yet they solved a problem that still challenges modern engineers. How do you keep a structure warm through weeks of sub-zero temperatures, using nothing but what the Earth provides? But before we answer that, I want you to understand something. This is not a story about survival. Survival is what you do when you're desperate. This is a story about belonging, about understanding your world so deeply that even the most violent winter could not make you a stranger in it. So how exactly did they build it? Because here's the thing most people get wrong when they imagine an Earth Lodge. They picture a hole in the ground with a roof thrown over it. Something crude, something desperate. But that image couldn't be further from the truth. What the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara built was not a hole. It was a thermal machine. Every single layer, from the deepest point beneath the floor to the very top of the dome, was doing a specific job. And those jobs worked together, the way organs work inside a body, each one keeping the whole system alive. It started underground. Before a single timber was raised, the builders dug down deliberately, anywhere from 3 to 5 feet below the surface. Because the Earth at that depth holds a secret that modern geothermal engineers still rely on today. No matter how brutal the winter above, the soil just a few feet down maintains a remarkably stable temperature, hovering around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. The ground itself became the lodge's first wall, a silent thermal anchor that kept the floor from ever going truly cold. The builders didn't read this in a textbook. They felt it with their hands, season after season, generation after generation, until the knowledge became as natural as breathing. From the edges of that excavated floor, the wooden frame rose upward. Cottonwood and willow, chosen for flexibility and rot resistance, were set in a circle and drawn inward toward the top, converging to form a self-supporting dome. No nails, no metal joints, just geometry. The circle distributing load evenly so the structure couldn't be pushed in from any single angle. The wooden skeleton of the Earth Lodge was not the bones of a building, it was the spine of a living creature. Over that skeleton came the skin, and this is where the science became truly extraordinary. First, woven branches packed tightly between the beams, then grass, laid in thick rows, each one trapping a thin pocket of air, then a final cap of sod, that dense mat of roots and earth that most people assume is merely structural. It is neither decorative nor structural. It is insulation in its purest natural form. The branches gave structure, the grass trapped air, and the sod locked everything together while absorbing moisture before it could reach the interior. Moisture is heat's enemy, and the builders knew this without ever naming the principle. That multi-layered skin was the lungs of the lodge, drawing out dampness, holding warmth, breathing slowly with the seasons. But insulation alone means nothing if the wind can find a way in. So the entrance always faced east, not for spiritual reasons alone, but for deeply practical ones. The most punishing winter winds on the Great Plains come from the north and west. By orienting the doorway eastward, the builders placed their thickest walls directly in the path of that wind. The entrance itself was a low tunnel that forced incoming air to slow down, change direction, and lose most of its chill before touching anyone inside. Sleeping areas were raised slightly above the main floor, because warm air rises and pools near the ceiling. And those extra inches meant the difference between waking up comfortable and waking up stiff with cold. The fire was never a roaring blaze. Small, steady, controlled. Because a modest, consistent flame produces far more usable heat than one that burns hot and dies fast. Every ember was managed. Nothing was wasted. Now, if you think you understand how the lodge worked, the insulation, the timber, the careful fire, I want you to hold that thought, because we've only described the structure. There was one element that no diagram could ever fully explain, one force that turned a well-insulated dome into something that felt genuinely alive. And that secret had nothing to do with engineering at all. The secret was fire. But not fire the way we think about it today. Not a switch you flip, not a dial you turn, not a utility hiding behind a wall. This fire was alive in a way that modern heating systems will never be. It sat at the absolute center of the lodge, directly beneath a circular opening at the very top of the dome. And it did something no furnace has ever truly replicated. It made the building breathe. Every single time that central fire was lit, the same elegant process began. Warm air rose, climbed the curve of the dome, and escaped through the smoke hole at the apex. And as it did, it created a continuous pull that drew fresh, cool air in through the low entrance tunnel at the opposite end. That air traveled across the floor, got pulled toward the fire, got warmed, and rose again, over and over. A self-sustaining loop of circulation that required no fan, no duct, no mechanical assistance of any kind. Modern architects have a name for this. They call it the stack effect, and they spend enormous amounts of money engineering it into high-performance green buildings. The Mandan had it working perfectly, in every lodge, without a single calculation written down. But what the stack effect cannot explain is what that fire meant to the people gathered around it. Because the hearth was not heating equipment. It was the social heart of the entire community. Elders told stories passed down through generations, their voices rising and falling with the crackle of the wood. Women stirred stews of dried meat and roots in clay pots above the flames, filling the dome with a smell so thick and warm, it felt like a living presence. Men shaped tools and repaired weapons at the edges, and children moved through all of it freely, absorbed into the life of the lodge the way water is absorbed into earth. Close your eyes and try to place yourself there. The deep, woody scent of burning cottonwood, the rich smell of slow-cooked bison, the earthier note of tanned hide and packed soil beneath it all. The fire crackles in a low, steady rhythm, and its light doesn't flood the space the way electric light does. It moves, it breathes, throwing long golden shadows across the curved walls. There are no separate rooms, no walls dividing one life from another. The warmth is shared because the space is shared, and because the space is shared, something deeper than warmth is shared too. Imagine being a child growing up inside this world. You wake each morning wrapped in furs, a few feet from the fire, surrounded by the sounds of people you love. You watch your grandmother's hands moving with quiet confidence near the flame, and you learn, not from instruction, but from proximity, from simply being present in a space that holds everything your world contains. And slowly you begin to understand something about the cold outside. It is not your enemy, it is your teacher. The force that made this warmth necessary, and in making it necessary, made it sacred. That is what separates the Earth Lodge from every other shelter built in that climate. Other structures kept the cold out. The Earth Lodge did something far more powerful. It invited people in. into warmth, into each other, into a way of living where survival and belonging were not two separate things but one and the same. Now here is something that most people never consider when they think about the Earth Lodge. They imagine one design, one universal answer to the problem of winter. But the builders of these structures were not following a rule book. There was no shared blueprint passed between nations, no standardized measurement, no single correct way to build. What existed instead was something far more sophisticated. A living, evolving conversation between human intelligence and local landscape that had been going on for centuries. No two communities built exactly the same lodge, because no two landscapes presented exactly the same challenge. In the northern reaches of what is now the Dakotas, where winters were the most punishing on the continent, the lodges went deeper, sometimes 4 to 5 feet into the earth, because every additional foot of depth meant another layer of the planet's natural warmth working in their favor. Rooflines were steeper, so accumulated snow would slide off rather than press down. Entryways were often doubled, one tunnel leading into a small transitional chamber, then a second passage into the main interior, creating a buffer zone that cold air had to cross before reaching the people inside. 2 doors where one might seem enough, because the builders understood that every degree of warmth lost at the threshold was a degree the fire would have to replace. Travel south along the river systems, where humidity replaced extreme cold as the primary threat, and the lodges transformed entirely. Structures were raised slightly above ground rather than dug below it, because moisture seeping up through the floor was more dangerous than cold seeping down from above. Sod layers grew thinner, ventilation more generous. Where cottonwood was scarce, builders turned to willow. Bark replaced sod in some regions. Woven mats lined interior walls. Every substitution was deliberate, every adaptation the result of someone paying close attention to what the land was offering and what it was withholding. What this reveals is something profound about the nature of indigenous knowledge. It was never static, never finished. It was a system of continuous observation, watching how a lodge performed through one winter, adjusting the next one based on what had been learned, passing those adjustments forward through oral tradition with the same precision that a university passes forward written research. The failures simply became the next generation's starting point. And now here is the part that should genuinely stop you. The most advanced architectural firms in the world today are spending millions of dollars trying to recreate what these builders achieved with bare hands and local materials. Passive design, regulating a building's temperature entirely through shape, orientation, and materials without mechanical assistance, is one of the most expensive frontiers in contemporary architecture. Buildings certified for passive performance can cost 30, 40, sometimes 50% more to construct. And the principles they are expensively engineering? Subsurface thermal mass, multi-layer insulation that traps air, strategic ventilation openings, east-facing orientations. These are not new ideas dressed in modern language. These are ancient solutions wearing new names. The Earth Lodge maintained livable interior temperatures through winters that regularly hit -30 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 40 years, built entirely from materials gathered within walking distance of its site. And when it finally returned to the Earth, it left behind no cracking concrete, no synthetic insulation leaching into groundwater, no rusting steel. It left behind richer, more fertile ground than had existed before it was built. The lodge didn't just fail to harm the land. It actively improved it, a standard that no modern building material on Earth has yet managed to meet. But there is one final layer to the Earth Lodge that no measurement can capture and no engineering diagram can explain. Because the people who built these structures were not only solving a thermal problem, they were building a cosmology. Every element of the lodge, from the shape of the floor to the angle of the smoke hole, was a deliberate statement about the nature of existence itself, encoded in timber and earth for anyone who knew how to read it. The floor was circular, not because a circle is easiest to excavate, but because it has no beginning and no end. It is the shape of the sun's path across the sky, the shape of the seasons returning to themselves, the shape of a life born, grown, aged, and returned to the earth. To stand inside that circular floor was to stand inside a diagram of existence. The entrance faced east, always east, because that is where the sun is reborn each morning. Every dawn, the first light entered through that low tunnel, and touched the interior before it touched anything else. That was not coincidence. That was intention. And at the very top of the dome, the smoke hole opened to the sky like an eye looking upward. The smoke rising through it was not waste. It was communication, carrying the gratitude of the people below toward whatever force they understood to be listening. The lodge was not a barrier between the human world and the natural world. It was a bridge between them, with the fire as the messenger and the smoke as the language. Each main support beam corresponded to a direction: north, south, east, west, and beyond direction, to an element, a season, a protecting spirit. The builders were not decorating their home with symbolic meaning after the fact. They were constructing meaning into it, from the very first timber placed in the ground. To live inside an earth lodge was to live inside a story. The oldest story any culture has ever told, about how the world was made, and what a human being's place within it is meant to be. And here is what makes that story extraordinary beyond its own time. Today, the descendants of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara are still building earth lodges, not as museum pieces, not as historical reconstructions, but as living spaces and teaching environments where young people can stand inside the same geometry their ancestors stood inside, and feel, in their bodies, what it means to be in relationship with the earth rather than simply on top of it. Each lodge that rises is not preservation. It is continuation. The same knowledge flowing forward through the same hands, adapting to the same questions every generation must answer about how to live well in a world that does not owe us comfort. Before the word sustainability existed, these people were living it. Before passive design was an architectural certification, they had perfected it. The conversation happening right now, in the world's most expensive architecture schools, about thermal mass, natural ventilation, and buildings that heal their landscapes, is a conversation that began on the Great Plains centuries ago and was interrupted, not concluded. So let's go back to where we started. Picture that frozen plain again. The wind screaming across open land. The snow moving sideways, erasing the horizon. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, a small dome barely visible against the white. Perhaps at the beginning of this story, it looked like not much at all. But now you know what it actually is. It is not a hole in the ground. It is not a primitive shelter. It is a civilization's answer to one of nature's hardest questions. So complete, so elegant, so deeply intelligent, that the most advanced builders alive today are still working to understand it fully. That small dome, glowing faintly from within. That is what it looks like when human beings stop fighting the world and start listening to it instead. This is what Primal Echoes exists to uncover. Not history for its own sake, but the living intelligence of those who came before us. People who understood things about shelter, warmth, and belonging that we are only beginning to remember. Every story we tell here is an echo of something real, something earned through generations of attention and care. And those echoes don't fade with time. They wait, in the soil and the timber and the smoke rising through a hole in a dome on a frozen plain, patient as the earth itself, ready to be heard again by anyone willing to listen. If that is the kind of knowledge you want to carry with you, then you know what to do. Stay with us, because the next echo is already coming.